Welcome to another episode of Final Affairs. Let's jump right in. If someone rewrote their will just 7 days before they died, would you trust that it was really their idea? Would you trust it even if they were legally blind, terminally ill, on a cocktail of medications, and suddenly everything they owned went to a child they hadn't spoke to in years? Because that's exactly what happened in this case. At the center of it all, an 89-year-old woman, a contested will, and a family split wide open. Now, before we get into it, I do want to make something clear. The stories that I share on Final Affairs are all true. They come straight from court records, legal filings, and trial transcripts, but because real people are involved, I won't be using their real names. I'll be changing the names and identifying details to protect their privacy. If you're curious and want to dig deeper, that's on you. But for me, it's about telling the story responsibly without adding fuel to the fire. These are real lives after all. So this is Final Affairs, where we explore the legacies people leave behind and the chaos that sometimes follows. Let's get right into it. We'll call her name Anne. In the summer of 2022, Anne was 89 years old. I want you to remember that. She was legally blind. She had been battling cancer on and off for nearly a decade, and she lived alone in a modest home in a small Delaware town. She had a reputation. She was fierce. She was difficult. She was the kind of woman who could hold a grudge for years, but also the kind of grandmother who, if she loved you, she made you feel like the only person in the world. See, Anne had 5 children, but her relationships with them ranged from distant to dysfunctional. One had already passed away, another was completely estranged. That left 3 who were still somewhat in contact, though contact is pretty generous here. She was known to butt heads, she was known to speak her mind, she was known to stir the pot. Her children said she was never happy with how they acted, and she always let them know it. But there was one person Anne trusted completely. That was her granddaughter, who we'll call Pamela. See, Pamela wasn't just family, she was devoted. She drove Anne to chemo appointments, she managed her in-home care, she took her to the grocery store, she coordinated doctor visits, she checked in on her every single day. She was Anne's life alert contact. That's pretty important. The first call if there were an emergency. So in 2019, when Anne decided it was time to finalize her will, she didn't call one of her children, she called Pamela. Anne sat down with a lawyer and laid out her wishes. Her daughter could live in the house if she could afford the mortgage. If not, it would be sold and the proceeds would be split 3 ways among her 3 surviving children. But the lawyer flagged an issue. There were too many ifs, too many conditions. That kind of gray area really invites chaos later, so Anne revised her plan. She would leave the house to Pamela. She trusted Pamela to sell it, split the proceeds fairly among the family, and keep a quarter for herself in recognition of everything she had done. The 2019 will was signed, it was witnessed, and it was locked away. Everyone thought that was the end of it. That's until July 2022. On a hot summer day, Anne pressed her life alert button. She told Pamela she didn't feel safe in her home. Pamela met the paramedics at the house, and Anne was taken to the hospital, where she stayed for about 10 days. After months of nonstop care, Pamela left town briefly for a long planned trip. And that's when Anne's estranged son, we'll call him Jerry, reappeared. Jerry hadn't been close with Anne for years. They actually lived next door to each other, but they hardly spoke. He actually once told people that Anne ruined their lives, him and his siblings. But suddenly, here he was. He was back. He was visiting Anne in the hospital. He was reconnecting with her, reconciling with her. At the time Pamela returned, everything had changed. Anne was discharged into Jerry's care. 2 days later, a notary shows up and executes a new healthcare power of attorney, naming Jerry her healthcare agent. 4 days after that, she signs a brand new will. This new will erased Pamela completely. The house left to Jerry. Executor of the estate, Jerry. Pamela, the granddaughter who had cared for Anne for years, was completely left out. She was out of everything. 1 week later, Anne unfortunately passed away. Pamela was stunned. She'd done everything. She wasn't just caring for Anne, she had helped set up the original will. And now suddenly Jerry had full control. So Pamela challenged it. In court, she argued that the 2022 will wasn't valid, that Anne didn't have the mental capacity to understand what she was signing, that Jerry had manipulated her, that this wasn't Anne's real intent. Jerry, of course, told a different story. He claimed Anne knew exactly what she was doing. He said she was clear-minded, furious, in fact, when she realized her old will didn't give him the house, and determined to fix it. But under questioning, Jerry made some admissions that raised serious doubts about the story he's telling. He said Anne wasn't firing on all 8 cylinders. These are direct quotes. He said she was on a hell of a cocktail of medications. He quite literally admitted that her judgment might have been impaired. And the notary testimony reveals that Anne, who was legally blind, signed the new will using guided assistance. This means someone placed a pen in her hand and helped her sign it. She couldn't see what she was signing. She relied entirely on what was read to her. And while one witness said the will was read word for word, another admitted that only the important parts were read. Jerry and his girlfriend, they were there, they were off camera when the notary conducted the Zoom call to draft the will. They coordinated everything. They set it up, they benefited from it, and it just didn't look good. The judge wasn't buying any of Jerry's story. In June 2023, the Delaware Court of Chancery ruled that the 2022 will was invalid. The court found that Anne was of a weakened intellect. She was 89 years old. She was legally blind. She was fresh out of the hospital, under heavy medication, dying of cancer. The list goes on. She was incapacitated, essentially. The court found that Jerry was in a confidential relationship with Anne. He controlled her access to care. He was her healthcare agent. He held all the power. The court found that Jerry had received a substantial benefit. He took the house. He made himself executor. And under Delaware law, that combination was enough to shift the burden. It was no longer Pamela's job to prove undue influence. It was Jerry's job to prove that he hadn't manipulated Anne. And he failed. The court set aside the 2022 will. It reinstated the 2019 will, the one that honored Anne's original wishes. Pamela didn't just win the case, she protected her grandmother's legacy. But at this point, the family's fractured, they're broken beyond repair, and all over a modest home, a fragile signature, and the desperation to claim control at the very end. If you think this couldn't happen to your family, I want you to think again. Because here's the thing, estate planning disasters don't just happen to billionaires. They happen to everyday people in everyday homes over everyday inheritances. Timing matters, privacy is important, but communication is critical. And caregivers, real caregivers, deserve to be protected, not erased. This story isn't just about one family's mistake. It's a warning to all of us. A legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's how you leave it. This has been Final Affairs. I'm Patience Babajide McCormick. And if you thought this story was wild, trust me, there's always another one waiting to be told. Till next time.